Welcome to RFI's Banking Uncovered, the podcast going behind the industry PR, the media spin, the product awards, and the investor reports to look at what's really going on in the customer data, and to ask global thought leaders about their thoughts and views on the future of banking and payments.
Hi there, Chloe James here for Banking Uncovered. We are really excited today to be speaking with Kathryn Petralia. Goes without saying, huge, big name, American entrepreneur, co-founder, obviously, of Kabbage, SME, leading fintech superstar, one of the OGs, I'd like to say. I was introduced to Kathryn via Rob Frorsheim, who is a great friend of mine, co-founder and chief keeper, and we're going to come on to that, of Keep Financial, and board member of, honestly, so many boards. I actually lost count as I was trawling through your LinkedIn, Kathryn. So very, very well established individual here. Kathryn is listed by Forbes as being one of the most powerful women in the world, which I love, and TechCrunch's most successful women in tech. Kathryn, welcome to Banking Uncovered.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Chloe.
It's really nice to see you. I wanted just to jump in on something I noticed on your LinkedIn, which is a quote that you have at the top by John Lewis. Never be afraid to make some noise and get into trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble. Just to kick off, can you let me know why you have that on your LinkedIn profile and what that means to you?
Well, it gets back a little bit to where I live. I live in Atlanta. I've lived here for 32 years. It's very important to me. And John Lewis has been a fixture in Atlanta. He died a few years ago, and that was his quote. And he was really active in the fight for racial justice in the 60s. And so that was his mantra. And it applies to things that are bigger and smaller than the fights that he was fighting. I think it's important to work hard to change things. I think John and I went to the same nail salon to get pedicures for many years. So
Wow.
to me, it was a fun connection.
I love that, but that is obviously such an important part of who you are and what you believe in and stand for, and that is on a personal level, but also on a professional level, given everything that you've done and achieved. Can you chat to me a little bit about Keep Financial and drawing that in?
Sure. A lot of the work that I've always done has been focused on, bringing people in to the fold. And 90% of all the jobs in the world, they're service jobs, they're hourly and shift workers, and they generally haven't had access to the kinds of things that we in tech think about as being normal parts of compensation. Things like equity, options, things that, most people who work in restaurants and retail and hospitality don't get access to. And so we thought, how could we help with the war on talent and the great resignation, which are things that aren't words that we're using as much right now, but are still challenges that we have with hiring and staffing. How can we help bring employers and employees closer together by giving employees pay when they work and giving employers tools they can use to attract and retain talent? And that's where Keep comes into play. We provide real-time payroll to employers and real-time pay to employees.
You've had some really grand ideas with the businesses that you've created. Can we go back to Kabbage and co-founding Kabbage with Rob? It obviously is, I mean, it's a superstar. And as I said in the opener, it's one of the OGs. It's one of the first, honestly, fintechs I heard of and was introduced to all those years ago. Coming up with that concept and idea, was it really just that you saw, is it the traditional story of you just saw that gap in the market and you thought we're gonna meet that gap and we're going to create something that's going to help all these SMEs and all these people with their livelihoods?
We probably would have had a much easier time raising money if that had been our story. But the story was really that PayPal had launched this API that allowed third parties to access real-time seller and transaction level data in order to mostly to help them manage inventory. But my co-founder Rob was like, "Oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if we could use that same data to help make a decision about whether or not a business that sells on eBay is eligible for a small business loan."
Mm.
And so it was really born out of technology, not out of necessarily a need for the market and in the market. And I think what's important about that is that the need is perennial. Small businesses always need access to capital. It's the
Yeah.
number one challenge that business owners say they face is access to capital. So
Yeah.
we're really fortunate that we were able to bring to them a solution to that challenge while using technology to help us manage risk, because real-time access to third-party verified data helped us mitigate some of the challenges that we had in providing lines of credit to people we'd never met before.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually got a couple of questions here, obviously, in that SME space, bringing in some RFI data into the conversation. Our data is currently showing that SMEs globally have a much greater digital appetite than consumers, which we do really know. Currently, 3 in 5 are not actually satisfied, though, with the innovation that they're receiving from their provider. And unlike consumers, they vote with their feet, right? Their switching intentions are huge. They really look around. What do you see as the opportunities for fintechs and banks actually in that space when it comes to innovation in SME lending?
I would say, we started Cabbage in 2008. So things were very, very different. Then most of the people listening to this were probably not even born yet, but that's a different conversation we're going to have. So I think what you saw happening in financial services was what I will call a disaggregation of products and services. So, fintechs like Cabbage, we were picking out lines of credit, access to capital that banks were providing, but not to everyone. They weren't providing it to all small businesses, just to the larger ones that they could understand and quantify. They could walk into the doors and look at the inventory, and all the traditional ways that financial services companies tended to evaluate small businesses for credit. And so we were able to use real-time access to data. And I think there were other companies doing similar things. If you look at payments, companies like Stripe were born out of this disaggregation. And then you had folks providing access to checking accounts and bill pay, and you name all of the products that banks traditionally offer to their customers. You had all these fintechs working vertically to address those challenges. And what we kind of discovered at Cabbage was that customers really wanted to get everything in one place. And that's where you could really create a better relationship, is when you could pull things together. And so we at Cabbage began in like 2017 or so, building things like checking accounts and payment processing and, integrations to accounting platforms and payment cards for employees, all of these things that employers needed, but they had to go to so many different places for. And I think now we're re-aggregating everything using technology. And the pandemic really did push traditional financial institutions to do better, to do more online, to provide more in-app for not just consumers, but also for small businesses. So I think the bar has been raised for everyone thanks to that. But I think fintechs probably are still a little bit above.
Yeah. No, I bet that you would sit in that. It's interesting that you raised that. I spoke to someone on the podcast recently about the pandemic and how that really brought an entire new cohort of people into forced digital banking. I remember speaking to my mother-in-law. This was back in Toronto, and I've said the story before on the podcast, but basically she needed to deposit a check. There's still so many checks in Canada. As an Australian, that's quite strange. We don't really do that here anymore. But anyway, Canada is still very strong check usage. But I showed my mother-in-law, using her phone to scan the check, and she just was absolutely blown away. And she's in her 70s at the time, and it's those kinds of people. I mean, we're going on to the consumer side now, but it's those kinds of people that were really brought in to digital banking and innovation. So in some ways, obviously, the pandemic was a absolutely catastrophic thing that happened to our world, but it did have some benefits, I guess, in the sense of people working digitally and technology needing to advance. It was sort of pushed, right?
I remember talking to a small business customer during the pandemic when we were working on a PPP at Cabbage, and he, which was the payroll protection program, and we were part of that program, and the small business customer banked with actually my bank here in Atlanta, and he could not even make a mobile deposit using his mobile app. As a small business customer, he had to schedule an appointment to go to the bank to put on a hazmat suit and go in and put his deposit his checks. And so that was a real problem for him because he had to take time out of his day. And he's like, but dude, I bank with you as a consumer.
Was that what the bank offered? That was the bank's offering at the time?
That was it. They had no mobile deposit for small businesses, and they fixed it. Like, they did something that year, but it was really interesting to me, and it highlighted just how behind traditional financial institutions were for like basic services that consumers really took for granted.
Yeah, especially in that payment space when it's just
Yeah.
needing things to be fast and seamless, and you just need the pay to arrive, so that it's all that big snowball effect, isn't it? The payment doesn't come in, and then you can't do this, and this. And in small business, I mean, that's your livelihood, and you're working. I've been hearing so much at the moment, and I mean, not at the moment, last little while, obviously, but AI, everyone's talking about AI. Every single place you go, every conference you attend, you know, it's all about the AI piece. I know that Klarna earlier in the year, obviously, they announced, and I'm sure that you'd be aware of this stat, but they replaced 7,000 service agents with AI, which resulted in customer inquiries being reduced from 11 minutes to 2 and a 40 million boost to their profitability. So I'm sure they were very happy about that. How do you feel about AI entering into the payment space, into banking and financial services just more generally? What are the worries? I've seen some really, I was actually watching a clip on Instagram last night of Cate Blanchett, the actress, the Australian actress, the global superstar, talking about her concerns with AI and, you know, how much this is going to affect certain people when it comes to fraudulent activity and different people being scammed. What's your view overall on AI? I know that's a big overall question.
As well, if I was Cate Blanchett, I might have a different view because, as we know, there have been some challenges with people maintaining their own identity, right? My
Yeah,
voice and my
that's what she's
likeness,
talking
and
about.
how can this be used for sure? I'm not in that camp, fortunately, so I don't have to worry about that. But I will say, we were using what would be called AI at Cabbage as early as 2010, which is machine learning models that made decisions on their own that were supervised by humans, because in financial services, things are very different. Like in financial services, you can't just build a model that decides who gets access to certain financial services and what your key pricing terms are, because you have to be able to, show to regulators that there's fairness, that there's not disparate impact in the models that you've built, and that everybody is being treated equitably. And so AI is really problematic in that way, making,
Yeah.
changing the user experience so that people can get to what they use the most, the fastest. That's pretty cool and that's exciting. And I think people want to do that. But actual decision making about what products you have and what the pricing is for them, I think it's going to be a while before financial institutions are able to deliver that to customers, for better or worse, and for now perhaps better. I just think we haven't seen we just haven't been able to understand what the downside could be. What I will say the upside is that Cabbage, we were always automated. Everything was fully automated. And what we found is that we had twice as many women and minority customers as existed in the general business owning population. Then because, and I think for two reasons. One of them was because people could do this anonymously. You could go online and you could apply online. You didn't have to sit across from a loan officer in a bank who is judging you and maybe didn't understand your business or you personally, or you look different than they did. And the other thing is we're using just data. We're using real-time data to make decisions, and the data was determining the outcome. And I think that was really important. When you have humans, we're just bad decision makers, generally
Yeah,
speaking.
it makes it just agnostic, doesn't it? If it's just it's
Yes.
data driven and you're just looking at the facts. It's, you know what, that makes me think of when a CV is supplied to an employer and they take off the name, whether that's a male or female name, or whether that's a name that's perhaps from, clearly from, it's not John Smith. It's just interesting when you take away those sort of variables and people and identifiers, perhaps we could say, and just take it down to the bare bones. And that's what data does. And that's quite
And I think it's exciting. Bad things can happen. You can make
Mm.
bad decisions with data. I mean, we had supervised and unsupervised machine learning models that were running, and we would look at the results sometimes of the unsupervised models that we would never just allow them to run into the wild without a human making a decision about them. And some of them we were like, nope, not that one. That can't go. That can't fly
Yeah.
because of things that you didn't expect, from unanticipated consequences of using data to drive decision making, can result in disparate impact. It has to be measured and managed.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch a little bit on, I want to come in a moment just to the future and sort of what you're seeing as far as innovation and disruption and things that you've got your eye on, and perhaps standouts that you're sort of looking at and thinking they're doing some really great things. But just before we head there, just another quick stat on consumer sentiment in the US, and I'm speaking to you sitting there in Atlanta, and I just would love your view on what it's looking like there for the industry and for consumers, ultimately US customer satisfaction and perhaps dissatisfaction, and what you see as the biggest issues facing US customers when it comes to their banking and financial services. What's the sense of, we've got the cost of living crisis, it's a stressful time, there's a lot of instability. Obviously, you've got, just had a big change in government that's coming in shortly. What's your view on the industry as it stands and perhaps consumer sentiment across the US with their banking relationship with their provider? Are they looking to switch? Are they looking to stay and keep things stable? What's your perspective?
I kind of wish I would have known you were going to ask me this question before because I could have thought about it a little bit more. But like off the cuff,
Crystal
what I would say is
ball,
I just
crystal
don't.
ball.
I don't think people care. I just don't think consumers in the US really care about their financial services provider.
Okay.
90% of all the jobs in the world, I mentioned this earlier, are service jobs. They're hourly and shift jobs. These are people
Yeah.
who are, paycheck to paycheck. They don't have $500 in order to deal with an unforeseen circumstance. And so what I think that drives is people who are more worried about just their day to day, and their financial institution doesn't help them with that.
Mm,
So I think if you look at the preponderance of people in the US, what they would like is like transparency, and they would like access to their compensation when they earn it. They'd like fair and transparent pricing on, products and services, financial services products that they use. I think that there's so much of a focus on the economy and political issues and things that are really, frankly, outside of anything that we do day to day.
yeah.
Perhaps as the transition happens in government and things become a little more stabilized, or we have a clearer line of sight on where things are going, consumers will focus a little bit more on their financial services providers. One thing that is true is everybody's like, when are rates going to come down so that I can buy a house that I can afford?
Yeah. Same
Housing is
here.
a really big issue.
Yeah,
Um,
same in
I'm I'm on
Australia.
I'm on the board of a company called PadSplit, and we help provide access to affordable housing, workforce housing,
What's the
and
company's name, Catherine?
PadSplit. I love this company. It's so exciting what they're doing. They're helping property owners who rent single family homes convert them into multi-tenant shared living space homes.
Oh,
And what it does is, again, provide affordable housing for a workforce who Atlanta is a great example of this because we have a really long one-way commute on average. People who cannot afford to live near transit, they cannot afford to live near their jobs, but they also can't afford to pay for gas, to drive 20 miles each way to get to their jobs. And so
yeah.
PadSplit sort of solves this problem by providing affordable housing. And so I think these are the real key issues that Americans care about. If you're asking about what Americans care
Yes,
about,
I am.
um,
Yeah.
I yeah, I need affordable housing. I need affordable gas, or if I want to buy a home for the first time, I need to have a mortgage that's like sub 6%.
Yeah.
And I think these are the real challenge that people are facing. They're not worried about, is their bank going to pay them like 10 extra cents a month on their checking account? I just don't think that's important to them.
No, it's a really refreshing, frank, and honest response. Thank you. I just love hearing that from your perspective. People don't really care about that. They just want the day to day, and such amazing statistics there on really who is living, day to day and just trying to get by. What's your view on education when it comes to financial products? Do you think that the industry is doing enough to educate? Like you made some great comments there about transparency and people just wanting transparency and wanting best, best price and things like that.
At the risk of pissing off all of the the big financial like behemoths in the US, what I would say is, like we operate as Americans in this idea that if we get a 5% mortgage, that's exciting. Like that's a low cost mortgage, but nobody thinks about the fact that the average American moves every 7 years, and we get a 30-year mortgage, and the first 7 years we spend paying down interest, not principal, which means
Yeah.
that you're never really paying off principal. Same thing with auto loans. You get a low cost auto loan, but your
Yeah.
vehicle depreciates 50% after the first year.
This is when
What's
you
the
drive it
effective
off the
APR
lot,
of
right?
that? Well, yeah, I was being generous. So, like,
Yeah.
there are all these things, like, there are all these challenges that Americans face, and we use these numbers, and people are really focused on, like, what's my APR, but they don't think about what's the numerator in that equation. Like, how much is the thing worth versus, what was it worth when I took out a loan? And I think that's where we're not good at transparency
Mm,
in disclosure. We provide student loans. Holy moly. I mean, I could talk about this for years and years and years. I
yeah.
mean, we had people, we had entry level people at Cabbage who were not able to participate in our matching 401k program because they were busy paying off student
Because you're
loans.
paying it
And
down,
so they
yeah.
weren't able to save for retirement. Like these are the real challenges that people are facing. And again, I love fintech and I love what we can do to innovate. And we're doing some things here, but
Mm,
there are some real structural challenges that I think we're facing that are not going to be solved by companies like mine
yeah.
or by fintechs generally.
It's a complete cultural change and shift. And when you talk about the student loans, you think about, the way they operate in some of the European countries and some of the Nordic countries about, education and it just being off you go to university, get a great education. You're not gonna be paying it off for the next 60 years. But that's a huge political, cultural, social change in structure. I mean, Australia is very similar to the US in many ways of how we um, work out. I don't even want to give you the age that I paid off my
I kind
student
of feel
loan.
like I kind of thought y'all were doing better than we are. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are a lot of similar issues, to be honest, with housing and challenges and people wanting to get into the market and the age at which people can do that. I think it's similar. But I was actually reading a stat the other day about how in the US, I'm not sure how true this is, but it was about how it's no longer the great American dream to own your own house, whereas that was such a strong dream. And I think that would be true of Australia as well, to be honest. That was certainly when I was growing up, it's, you own your house. And I just don't know if that's really true anymore, or people are happy to operate in a different way, maybe in a more European behaviors.
Well, the difference in the US is that you can never discharge a student loan, even
Mm,
under bankruptcy. Whereas in Europe, you can. Like if you don't, that's why people don't own homes, right? Because it
yeah,
just follows you around forever. So I feel like there are some, like again, there are some structural things that would have to change in order to, change that aspect,
yeah.
at least in the US. And I'm not sure how student loans operate in Australia.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, they're very expensive and they take a long time to pay off, but there you go. You basically, you pay it off as when you start earning enough as deemed by the Australian government that you can afford to start paying it off, essentially. In a
I
nutshell.
think my husband and we've been married for 32 years, and I think
Yeah.
we've been married for 15 before we paid off his student loans.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. It's yeah, doesn't actually shock me. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up soon. I've loved speaking with you. You've got such amazing energy and just generosity of thought. It's so fun. Want to talk a little bit around disruption, innovation, what's on your radar. I'm just wondering whether you look at alternate industries when you see some really, or perhaps you have a really great experience, a really great CX and what that looks like and who that's done by, or any insight there?
You're talking about, I'm building a company, and how do I think about how I interact with my customer?
Yeah, or just no, I'm talking about more so great examples of innovation that you're
Oh,
experiencing as a person operating in the world and who you think is doing it well and why. What's making that stand out?
I've got to call it Revolut.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like they are crushing it in Europe. They're coming to the US. They're coming for you, whoever
Yeah.
you are. They're coming for you.
I use it,
Um,
so I know the product. I use
that's
it.
great.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a great example. You can do all the things you want to do in one place, especially if you're working in an environment like the EU. It's so special to be able to, so many people are working across countries. You're Portuguese, but you're working in Germany, and
Yeah.
they just make it easy to operate, across country in that kind of an environment. I think it's really impressive, and allowing the sort of crypto on and off ramp and the FX. I mean, these are all things that are important to
Yeah.
people. And the US is a little different because we don't, I mean, except for people who, a lot of people who've come to the country who are remitting elsewhere. This is
Mm,
important to them. But for most Americans, they just don't think of it as something that's really important. Is how do I move money around the world?
yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing that companies are tackling. And I think it's going to become more and more important. And I would say in the US, not a lot of companies have really distinguished themselves
Yeah.
in that area. In crypto, I'm going to sound like a really old person. I'm going to be like Homer Simpson, get off my lawn. No, is that Homer Simpson, get off my lawn? Get off my lawn, all of y'all. But, the young people care about crypto. They want to
Yeah.
use it. They want to figure out how to use it, however it is, and whether they want to invest, whether it's speculative, whether it's long term, whether it's just a way for them to feel like they're safeguarding their capital.
Yeah.
We have to get better at making it accessible and regulating it in a way that people feel like their money is safe. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Um, Customer experience wise in the US, I'm not that excited about anything.
Okay.
I would love to see something like really bold and fun and new come about in the US,
There you go.
but
You've
I
thrown out
haven't.
the test. I like it. That you want it. Yeah.
I want it. You know what I want? Like when we have a home in Portugal, and so we have a bank account there. And if I want to send money to the people, I just put in the IBAN number, and then
Brilliant.
I just send them the money, and then that just happens. And
Mm.
here, there's so much pomp and circumstance about it. I'm like, I just want to send you money, and I'm like, oh, what do you have? Do you have Zelle? Do you have PayPal? Do you have Cash App? Do you have like Venmo? What about Apple Pay? Like I have to ask 47 questions to figure
Yeah.
out how I can give you money.
Yeah.
Like, can
Yeah.
we solve this?
Yeah, I love that one. It's like, I'm trying to pay you. You would think that that would be, you would hope that that could be a little bit easier, but no,
You
that's a
would.
really good one. That's a great one. I love the Revolut example as well, and I use that. And as we, as there are more and more global citizens in the world, and surely as time moves forward, I think we'll begin to see that more and more and more as the world becomes more accessible to more people. We need that cross-border payments is just, and that to be done smoothly, succinctly, easily is just so important. I'm going to ask you one more question with a female spin on it. It's an industry issue question, and I hope you're happy to answer it, just given who you are and all that you have achieved. Widely leaked figures suggest that men, on average, now earn 54% more than women at one of the biggest global banks, and I'm not going to name it, but if you just type that into Google, you'll see who it is. What's your view on the widely publicised gender pay gap in banking and financial services? Do you have a view? Do you think
Yeah.
it can be done differently? Cool. Give me your view.
Well, okay. So we have babies,
Yes.
the women.
Yes, I
It's
have
because
to.
we have the uteruses.
That's
What's the
true.
uteri? Anyway, we have to
You're
have the
right.
babies. And so I have two sons, and so I get it. Like you have, and I've always been an entrepreneur. I've been fortunate that my husband's been the primary parent at home, or else I couldn't have done any of the things,
Yeah.
except I did have to have the babies. And so I think it's really hard because, it's such a like pat answer, and I hate saying it, but it is because when we have children, we take off time
Yeah.
and we compromise, I think, our upward mobility when we do that.
Yeah.
And I think most women are fine doing that. Most women are like, this is important to me, this is what I want to do. I
Yeah.
don't want to like put this like burden on women to be like, oh, we're giving up so much and it's terrible. But it's true, like we have to do it. And so American Express, they acquired Cabbage, my last
Yeah.
company,
Yeah.
and they have 5-month parental leave for all parents and 6 months for the birth parent. And I really respect and admire this because it does promote and support the fact that people have children. Like we, as a
It's
people, we
amazing to
have to
see
have
that in the
babies.
US from an American company, because
Yes.
that's a huge change from 12 weeks, I think it is at some places, right? Or less
It
than.
is. And so that's 1,000,000% why I would love to say it's because like men don't want to. I wouldn't love to say this, but it'd be so easy to say like it's because women can't get promoted. It's because like
Mm.
men are discriminatory. It's not. It's because we're like at home nursing and stuff. And
Yeah.
then when we go to meetings, we have to go to like some pumping room in order to pump. I pumped in like board meetings and town
Yeah.
halls and
Yeah.
all of my one-on-ones. Like
Yeah.
that's just a part of what we have to do when we have
Yeah.
babies. And I think we're getting there. there. I think we're like so close to like hitting that level of
Yeah.
parity. I don't know what the number would have been 10 years ago,
Yeah.
but I bet we were paid a lot less.
Do you know what's so amazing to see a company like Amex do that? Because it's such a huge global name and to sort of pave the way. So I think a comment that I could make from your response there is just if some of the big, global businesses and American businesses, have initiatives like that and create programs like that, that certainly hopefully puts pressure on, quite frankly, some other businesses to do the same. I was thinking about this recently about how not typically, but often women have their babies like I did at basically like the height of my career.
True.
Because I was just my age, I was in my later 30s when I had my children too extremely quickly and close together because I just was running out of time and it all just had to happen like that. But that was probably the time, whereas I think of a man in his mid to late 30s, that is,
They
prime.
can do whatever they want to.
But that's like foot on the gas time of I'm going to become like, that's when you're going to become an executive and get into that executive level and just age wise, executive and then up into the higher ranks. And so that's the moment that you sort of step out. But again, thank you for
But
your
you're running
response.
off into the nursing room,
Yeah.
while they're having a meeting, right? So, which is fine, as long as the organization understands that
Yeah,
that's
I've
not a
hosted a
that's not a
podcast.
dig.
I've hosted an episode of Breaking Banks with Brett King when I was nursing before, but I just
Ah,
switched my camera off for that part, and we could actually hear my daughter Louise making little noises as we were sort of recording. But you know what? That's life. That's just all, we're
that
all
is life.
human, and that's a part of it. I've loved the openness of this conversation. Just maybe a little bit on what 2025 looks like for you, Kathryn, what you're excited about, and what we can see from you in the next year.
I'm generally always excited about things that open access to more people. So mainstream financial services products. The democratization term is used a lot, but
Yes.
I think we're not there yet. I think there are so many people who either don't understand how to use or don't have access to traditional financial services products that can help them manage their finances and build wealth. And these are all things that I think are important. And again, 90% of the people in the world fall into this category. And
Mm,
so the more we build up these people, the more we help them spend less and save more, the better our economies are altogether. So I look forward to more companies that are doing that.
absolutely. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on Banking Uncovered. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you. Thanks, Kathryn.